Welcome to the Business of Apparel podcast. This is the place to learn how to start and scale your own apparel brand and fill it with loyal customers for years to come. I'm your host, Rachel Erickson, owner and CEO of Unmarked Street. I can't wait to share this episode with you. Welcome back to the Business of Apparel podcast. Today, I'm so excited to have with us Nicole Giordano, who is the owner of StartUp Fashion. I have shamelessly been following her for a while now, just binging all of her content whenever I can, learning as much as I can from her. And I think her company is such an amazing complement to what we do at Unmarked Street. I really wanted to get the word out about what she is doing and what she's teaching. So welcome, Nicole. I'm so glad to have you today.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
So Nicole, let's just start. I would love for you to just tell us a little bit about your background in the apparel industry and kind of how you came to create and own StartUp Fashion.
Well, my background, I went to school for textile design. So I have always had an interest in the art of fashion, how it's made, the creation. That was like the beginning of how I got into the industry. When I graduated, I had this idea that I wanted to have my own business making accessories because I was weaving all of this fabric and I wanted to do things with it. I had zero experience, knowledge, understanding, anything of owning a business, but I thought, why not? I'm young and I'm just going to try it. So I began that, launching my own line, realizing there was a lot to learn. So I simultaneously worked in different parts of the industry so that I could learn while I was, working on this business. So I have background in, business operations, like working with a small business. I started doing fabric sourcing in the garment district in Manhattan.
Oh my God, amazing.
Eventually, yeah, it was interesting. I learned a lot. I eventually started doing, it wasn't called this at the time because it was a long time ago, but content creation for e-commerce businesses. And so that led into marketing. So I was learning a lot of stuff, simultaneously running this accessories business that kept growing. And I was starting to see the successes that, getting the press and making some sales online and getting into some boutiques and things like that. And ultimately what got me to StartUp Fashion is that, I came to realize I actually didn't love having a fashion business. For me personally, I think maybe because I was the whole hook of my business was that I was hand weaving all this fabric. And so it just I was like turning into a machine and I didn't love that. But the whole time that I had been working on this business and starting to see these successes, I had other independent makers within the fashion space asking for advice. Like, oh, how did you get this, feature in this magazine? And oh my goodness, you're in this boutique that I've been trying to get in. And what I came to realize is that I actually really loved that part of it. I loved the teaching and the mentoring and the strategizing and the things that I was doing with other people. So what happened was I decided I was going to start a blog. And I continued working in the industry, absorbing things. And I started a blog because I was seeing a lot in the traditional fashion industry that I didn't like. You will see a lot of behind the scenes if you work in sourcing in the garment district of Manhattan, right? Like you're working with all of these big fashion companies and you're going into their offices and you're like hearing, production orders of 25 yards, which there's nothing wrong with having a small business, but what was happening was like all of this smoke and mirrors about what was successful and what they were doing when I was seeing behind the scenes. And I was like, you were on the cover of Vogue last month, acting as if you have this like financially thriving business and that it all came about in just, 6 months time. But your production orders for your fabric is at 25 yards. So let's be real here. Let's be honest, So anyway, I began the blog. It became advice for how to build a fashion business in the way that you want to, not the way you think it needs to be done based on all of the smoke and mirrors and the fallacies that you're seeing on, in New York. And then it went from there. It began as a blog that was not a business. It was just me sharing. It built community, and it was clear that there were a lot of independent makers who wanted to create real businesses doing something they really enjoy doing. They weren't necessarily looking to have a runway show in Manhattan. They were looking to make sales and make, a nice living doing something they really enjoy. So then we eventually launched the membership component and turned it into a business.
That's
so
amazing.
That was a really long story, but it was a long period of time,
Yeah, no, that's a great story. And I think it's important to kind of also call out, 25 yards for a production run is ridiculous on the small side. Like as an apparel, as a consultant for bigger companies, we basically run into like 1,000-yard, 3,000-yard MOQs. And that's because as the mills are making that fabric, Nicole is super talented to be able to do this by hand. But as mills are kind of going in to make all of this on a machine, there's just no efficiency in doing something that small. And so it really ends up being a problem for the entire supply chain line as they're making something that small. And so to Nicole's point, it just kind of starts to create problems at every level of production. And so, yeah, it's crazy to see stuff like that. So I'd love for you to talk us through a little bit. Tell us about your memberships and how someone could get started with you if they wanted to come to StartUp Fashion.
StartUp Fashion is our ongoing membership, and this is specifically for aspiring independent fashion brand owners. So those who have not launched yet and they really need a blueprint and a mentor for launching, getting from an idea in their head to like an actual product in their hand. So that is, like I said, it's an ongoing membership, which means you join, and like any other subscription, you're a member until you don't want to be anymore. And then you can cancel. But we, I don't do that. I want to be honest about it. You can cancel when you don't want to be a member anymore. I say it because most people stay for a while because there's a lot to learn, and we're a great community. And so, so that is what we began with. And we open that a couple of times a year and you can join, and you're really everything from, mindset work to product development to marketing, pre-launch marketing, planning the business, all the different things you have to plan when you want to launch a business. So we cover all of that. And then what happened, so we'd had that for years. And then what happened a few years ago is we realized so many of our members were getting to the point of launch, like they launch, which is like, yay, celebrate. This is what the goal was. And then they need more help in those early years of having a business to really get to the point of seeing those sales coming in. And we were touching upon that in StartUp Fashion, but it wasn't where the real focus was. So we launched Level Up Fashion, which is a 3-month program. It's not an ongoing membership. And it's really focused on, newly launched fashion brands that really are looking for a framework on how to effectively market their new business and start seeing those consistent sales. So we cover a few things, mindset work again, and then into marketing strategy and sales strategy to really help build habits and consistency within the work that you're doing as a new brand, so that you're not wasting time doing things that aren't as important, and you're zeroing in on the things that will help bring you some growth in terms of sales and audience size and that kind of thing.
Amazing. I love that. And like full disclosure, I am a member of Level Up Fashion because when I launched RTQ Apparel, it was just very apparent to me, like I don't understand sales and marketing. I'm just going to full disclosure. So, I can make product all day long and I can help brands make product. But when it comes to the sales and marketing side, it's like taking on a whole new career. And so when I started watching Nicole talk about some of that, it just felt like a really good fit to come into the program. And one of the first things that I really loved was your focus on mindset, because a lot of the coaching that I've done in the past, a lot of it can be like almost overly positive, like manifest this and put this out there and it'll just happen for you. And I think what I love about your program is this thought about like blockers and actually thinking about like some of the negative aspects of what can happen as a new brand. And so a couple of things there. I'd love to first understand, like, how was that kind of an epiphany for you? Like, did you have almost a moment or an instance where you were like, mindset has to come first?
StartUp Fashion did not begin with mindset work. In the beginning, when I first launched it, that section of the blueprint and everything wasn't there. And it was my own experience as a business owner that started opening my eyes to this missing piece, right? I lacked confidence in the early stages of business. I worried about things that, maybe I didn't need to worry about yet. I allowed fear to hold me back, right? Like I had to learn how to stop doing those things myself. And so then it became clear to me over a bit of time, like I'm teaching others how to launch a business. And I've been through this and I continue to go through it a little bit. And it's like, wait a minute, I'm missing a big piece here. And so I added the content around mindset work to the blueprint later on, like later after it had been around for a couple of years before that was really a part of it. And it was my own work with, trying to improve how I was, thinking about business and how I felt about business each day. I think it's something we don't think about as owners often. Like, how am I feeling about any of this, right? Like, how do I feel about the work I do every day? How do I feel about my greater mission? How do I feel about my own, abilities to make this happen? Like, what are the feelings going on? So I needed to make sure that it was added to Startup Fashion. And then when I launched Level Up Fashion, it was an absolute, like I knew that this was going to be a big part of it, especially when you're getting to I shouldn't say especially, because launching, there's a lot of mindset work, but sales, marketing, you're putting yourself out there. There's a lot of rejection in that area of business. Like it's a lot of mindset work needs to be done. So, it's the kind of thing where like it became really clear to me that I can teach people, everything about how to put together a business plan, and I can hand somebody a list of factories, and I can teach them how to get into boutiques. And none of that though is going to matter if the mindset work hasn't been done, because of things like, it's a hard business and there is a lot of rejection and trying to, keep going when you're unsure of things. And so it didn't matter all of the like information I was teaching if I didn't start with that stuff. And I started that was confirmed to me as I was paying attention to the kinds of questions that my members would ask. So many of them they were rooted in mindset stuff. Like, should I think about doing this instead? Or like, how should I, what if I call this boutique owner and, it doesn't go well? And, these are just silly examples. Well, I shouldn't say silly, but just like random examples. No, yeah. But all of those things, as I would get those questions that were they seem at face value like they're strategic, but really when you dig in, you're like, no, this is something going on in my head, right? Like this is something I need to work on in that way. So it just became, okay, there needs to be like entire modules dedicated to mindset work for any program that I put out there.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's something that I go back to often. Like the pages that we kind of wrote through that module are really important to me. Like I kind of have to keep them separate so that I can go back to them on a regular basis and kind of remind myself, like, these are my blockers and this is what's kind of holding me back, and how to kind of overcome some of that. I'd be really curious for you to share, just for the audience to kind of know, like, what are some of the most common blockers that you tend to hear from some of your clients? I'm sure there's plenty of it out there and people might recognize that in themselves a little bit.
Yeah. I love this question. I identifying your blocks, I think is such a major step in the process. And we don't know, it's not something we do naturally, take the time to really dig in. And just to clarify for your listeners, a block is anything in your life that is rooted in fear and it will hold you back from achieving any goal. It doesn't just have to necessarily be around business, but we talk about it in the context of business. And I would say the one that comes up with probably almost every single student we've had come through Level Up is this need for things to be just right or perfect, like done, like this perfectionism. Yes. And I get it, because we're creative people. You have a vision, right? Like for what you want this business to be, what you want each individual thing to look like that you're doing within your business. We're not just talking about the business as a whole, but it becomes clear to me that this like needing to be perfect, when we wait for things to be just right or quote unquote perfect, what we're really doing is giving ourselves an out, right? Like from doing the difficult stuff. And it's like, it becomes the excuse and it's a block. It's this belief that like, oh, well, you know, it keeps you comfortable, right? And safe. So it keeps you from saying things like, from doing things like any kind of marketing initiatives, right? Collaboration outreach or writing and sending emails or posting anything other than like static images on your social media. And it becomes this block where you're telling yourself, I need this. This isn't just right yet, or I can't put this out there yet. And it really, when you dig into it, is you fear around looking silly or feel fear around, someone. So that's your block. You have this block that, oh, what if I do this and it's not perfect and I look silly? Like, okay, well, so what? Right. So I would say that is a really common one. And it's just something that, there are a lot of them and everyone is different, but this is one that I see often. And I think what's really important is to identify these things and then move past them. And, we go deeply into this in Level Up, but just, if it's helpful to your listeners, there's a process that in the most basic form is for you to think through, okay, well, is there something I haven't been able to accomplish, a milestone, a goal that I haven't been able to reach? And then reflect on why you think that is. And the key to just keep asking yourself why until you really get to the root of something. Like we were just saying, like, oh, at the root of this, it's like, I'm so worried about looking silly that I'm, letting perfectionism keep me from doing the things I want to do. And then you create your action plan. When this pops up for you, what do you do? What do you say to yourself? Do you journal? Do you call a friend? Like, what is your action for pushing past it? So yeah, I would say that's probably a big one that a lot of people could identify with.
Yeah. I think you mentioned like the most important part is that action plan afterwards, right? Like, how do you get yourself out of it? Because I think if you have a group of friends or you have a group that you kind of work with to just kind of always pump each other up when you need it, that's super powerful to be able to get on the phone and all of a sudden you feel like Superwoman, right? It's just not like from this blocker all the way to feeling amazing about something. And it gives you that energy. It gives you that boost that you really need to go forward. So for those of us, I've heard you talk a little bit about this on Instagram and some of your other social media. And so I just wanted to kind of ask if you'd be open to sharing just some of your top tips, like maybe 3 to 5 tips on like, if you're launching your apparel brand, like what are your first few things that you would really need to do to even get your first sale?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are 3 areas that I think are probably a good place to really pay attention to and really zero in on. Definitely prioritize collaboration. I think that one can sometimes be misconstrued. This isn't necessarily about like hiring influencers. It's about coming together and tapping into the audiences of other brands who, with whom you share an ideal customer, and coming up with ways to collaborate, right? So they can be the most basic things, podcast interviews, right? Doing something on Instagram together. Like it doesn't have to be that you're like working on a product collaboration or anything. But finding fun and interesting ways to collaborate is one very important way for reaching a much broader audience who will love your products and make a purchase, right? Because when you're talking about sales, it's 2 avenues you're thinking about. You're thinking about, okay, how do I reach people? And then of the people I'm reaching, how do I convert them, right? And so what tends to happen is for new businesses, and we're talking about like first sales, we forget that a large portion of our time in those early, that early stage really needs to be in expanding that audience and reaching new people. Something like collaboration helps move that forward more quickly and you're reaching people at more scale. So it's absolutely a place to spend some time. Rachel, like I've said my favorite lesson in Level Up Fashion is around that. I mean, after the mindset stuff is really around that collaboration model, because it can be so powerful. So I would absolutely suggest that. The second thing I would suggest is sending more emails than you think you should, and really thinking through making sure that you're sending a variety of two kinds of emails. So by that, making sure that you are sending emails that are both talking about your business and products and like a hard call to action, like for selling, but then also talking about things that are just interesting to your potential customers or current customers, so that they're not associating every email that they get from you with, like a sale, so that they're opening up more of your emails, right? Because, this is also from a strategic standpoint in terms of, when Google and stuff, the more these people open up your emails, the less likely they are to fall into the promotions folder and stuff like that, right? So it's, you want to think about it from the content perspective, like, okay, well, I want them to enjoy what they're getting from me. I don't always want to be selling to them. But also from just smart business move, like, okay, well, this is how SEO works. This is how, things like that. But also not being scared to ask for the sale. So I think one of the things that I realized is that over the years, I would talk a lot about making sure you're sending emails that aren't just about selling. But then what would happen was sometimes students would then not send any about selling. I'm like, no. We need both. We need both. And we need a lot of them. You're always going to need to send more than you think you should, because you are the one sending them. So it feels like a ton of emails to you, but from the recipient, they just have a ton of emails in their inbox anyway. Like they're not associating with you with sending them tons and tons of emails. It's just, everybody just gets a lot of emails. So I would say that's the second one. Okay. And then the third would be live events, doing things in person. Pop-ups, trunk shows, markets, fairs, in-home shows. Like, feel free to get creative, but meet people in real life. When you're trying to get those first sales, being face-to-face with people, having those conversations, the passion you have for your products, for what you're creating, will come through in a way that can sometimes get a little lost digitally. Not always, but sometimes. So really prioritizing signing up for some of these things that are going on just within your own community. You don't have to travel. You don't have to do expensive trade shows, but see what's going on in the closest city to you if you're not in a city, and sign up for some things. Get out there and meet people in real life.
I think that's such good advice. And that's something I need to do myself, is kind of get back out there. I recently joined our local Chamber of Commerce and trying to look up when some of those events are going to be happening. And so I think that's so spot on. I think to kind of go back on the collaboration thing too, I'm really learning that the people who you even think might be your competition out there, online, end up being some of the best people to collaborate with. And so it's just such a different thing than to think of them as competition out there. And so I think that that's something I just kind of wanted to put out into the world. Even if you think you're competing against somebody for the same space or for the same product, coming together with them and kind of sharing an audience and helping each other amplify each other is really special. And so, yeah, I think that's a huge one. It's something that I'm definitely looking into soon too. And when it comes to emails, I know even for me, I have this blocker, right? Of well, everybody's going to unsubscribe from all my emails if I send them too many. And at the end of the day, when I even look at the emails I get, it's I might not want to read this one, but I just delete it. I don't unsubscribe from it. And so I wait for the next one, and maybe I read through that whole thing. And so I think it is a moment of being brave, but yeah, to your point, otherwise people aren't going to, get to know you and get to know your stuff. And so that's important.
Yeah.
So Nicole has so much amazing information that she can share. If you go to startupfashion, is it .com? Yeah. So go to startupfashion.com, look up Nicole, check out when she's doing some of her next launches. I really encourage you to go out and become part of her community. She has so much to teach. And thank you so much for being on the podcast today. This was wonderful.
Thank you, Rachel. It was really great chatting.
Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Apparel podcast. I would so appreciate hearing your thoughts on the show. And if you know someone who could benefit from it, please share it with them. My biggest desire is to help other apparel professionals understand the nuances of our industry so we can all work toward making better product for a better world. If you would like to connect further, I'd love to invite you to send me a message through my website, unmarkstreet.com, where I do weekly trainings through my video channel, a monthly newsletter, and offer so many resources to help you start and scale a profitable apparel brand.